The RTX 3060 is the most popular graphics card in the world, and for good reason. It crushes games at 1080p and 1440p, and at $250, it's one of the best GPUs you can buy today. But what if I told you I just bought a graphics card that performs even better in both 1080p and 1440p for $87? This is AMD's RX 5700 XT, a $400 graphics card from 2019, and today you can find it for as little as $72 on the used market. And I know what you're thinking, there's no way the one I got isn't a scam. The price is just insane. So in this video, I'm putting the 5700 XT to the test to find out if it's really as good as they say, or if there's a reason it's this cheap 6 years later. But you might be wondering why I even bought this GPU in the first place, because right now I'm using a $400 graphics card, the 6900 XT. The 5700 XT is not even close to being as powerful. Well, a few weeks ago, I tested another 3060 killer, the GTX 1080 Ti, and that thing was shockingly fast. For under $200, it beats the RTX 3060 by 3% at 1080p and 5% at 1440p. But here's the part that I intentionally left out of that video. The RX 5700 XT is even faster. According to TechSpot's benchmarks, the 5700 XT beats the 1080 Ti at 1080p and matches it exactly at 1440p. So not only does this $87 GPU beat the 3060, but it also beats the 3060 killer. But there's just one thing. Anything that sounds too good to be true is probably too good to be true. And this is not an exception, because to beat the 3060, 1080 Ti, and 2070 Super at this price point, this GPU comes with quite a few compromises. First off, it doesn't support ray tracing at all. You can't just turn on RT and deal with the worst performance. The option simply doesn't exist. Secondly, it only has 8 gigs of VRAM, and in 2025, 8 gigs continues to be a serious problem even at 1080p, as it causes GPUs to be physically incapable of smooth gaming performance at ultra and sometimes high settings. However, specs on paper don't mean anything if the GPU can't deliver where it matters most, actual gaming performance. Starting with Cyberpunk 2077, one of the most demanding games ever released. Fortunately for us, this game is about as GPU intensive as it is optimized, so I was confident that we could still get solid performance with this card. And the 5700 XT did not let me down. Despite this being an Nvidia sponsored game, it still gets 74 FPS at 1080p high settings, which is identical to the RTX 3060. I don't think anyone could have predicted that. At 1440p, it continues to be extremely impressive. Not even for the price, but impressive in general. And let me remind you, this is native 1440p with no upscaling. This resolution only really becomes an issue on the high preset as it drops down to 47 FPS. But this is easily fixed by using FSR quality, which provides both the consistent frame rate of 1080p and similar visual quality as 1440p. However, a game that we definitely will not be able to run at 1440p is Black Myth Wukong. But before we get to that, let's quickly try two other Unreal Engine 5 games, because if the 5700 XT can't handle those, it has no chance here either. The first Unreal Engine 5 game is Fragpunk, and despite this being the newest game of the video, this one runs great at 1440p epic settings, easily hitting 100 FPS without any upscaling. In contrast, Marvel Rivals is an unoptimized mess of a game. At 1080p, it runs fine, averaging just under 60 FPS at high settings, and 1440p high gets above 60 FPS as long as you use FSR quality. And that brings us to Black Myth Wukong, a true stress test for any GPU. The only way we can get this Unreal Engine 5 game to run even close to 60 FPS at 1080p is by dropping settings down to medium, and even then we finish the benchmark with 2 FPS short of 60. But right at the end of the benchmark, it throws up a warning of what's to come next, as VRAM usage gets dangerously close to the 8GB limit. And that warning we just saw turns into a full-blown problem in the very next game. But something that I will never have a problem with is my brand new custom mousepad. You might have seen me use my custom mousepad for the past few months, and I gotta say it turned out really clean and it's super nice quality. And for this week only, it's 10% off with code LEC10, but it's only available for a limited time, so be sure to grab one from the link in the description. Anyways, back to the video. In Control, the 5700 XT holds up fine at 1080p high, but the moment we switch to Ultra, things fall apart. Because we're now using over 8GB of VRAM, our 1% lows get cut in half, the 0.1% lows are now a third of what we had, and the stuttering becomes mind-numbingly bad. Now for the biggest surprise, Fortnite. Everyone says that Fortnite runs poorly on AMD, but this GPU defies all expectations. I was getting an average of 385 FPS after a full 20-minute game, with the 1% and 0.1% lows actually holding up surprisingly well. Cap your frames to 240 or 360 and you're gonna have a great time in this game. So far, we've mostly been looking at how the 5700 XT handles modern games at 1080p, but with 1440p monitors becoming more and more affordable, I think it's time we see how well it performs in 1440p and 4K without upscaling. But that raises a big question. If it's already struggling with VRAM at 1080p, how can it possibly handle 1440p or even 4K? Well, when we're not relying on upscaling, the 5700 XT actually has everything it needs to handle high resolutions, like the memory bus width. Although it's older than both the 3060 and the 4060, it has a 256-bit bus, which is both wider than the 3060 and twice of the 4060. This wider bus might explain why it still has pretty decent 1440p performance. Secondly, the 57XT also comes with 48 more texture mapping units than the Nvidia GPU. This might not mean much to you, but if you play older games that mainly relied on high quality textures instead of the advanced lighting effects we have today, the 144 TMUs on the AMD alternative gives it a pretty big advantage. But that doesn't mean it's worse in newer games either, because it also has considerably more ROPs. Again, this may not sound like a big deal, but if you remember that time when Nvidia was sending out RTX 5080s with just 8 missing ROPs, that caused about a 5% decrease in performance on average. So the 16 ROP difference between these two GPUs could end up being a big advantage for AMD. More ROPs means it can handle higher pixel output, which is very useful when it comes to rendering higher resolutions like 1440p and 4K. The only thing really holding it back is the 8GB VRAM capacity. So in order to see what this card is really capable of, we need to stop looking at just modern unoptimized titles. Because in older or better optimized games that don't eat VRAM like crazy, this is where the 5700 XT shines. I mean, the GPU itself is like 6 years old, so I guess it makes sense. If we take a look at Uncharted 4, the textures in this game look absolutely amazing. And even then, Uncharted 4 still gets 76 FPS at 1440p Ultra. Tomb Raider, for example, gets 75 FPS at 4K Ultimate. Rise of the Tomb Raider gets 66 FPS at 4K High. And even Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which is still a very popular game to benchmark in 2025, gets a very solid 74 FPS at 1440p on the highest preset. Extremely impressive. So is this GPU worth picking up for under $150? Absolutely. Sure, it gets outclassed by newer cards in ray tracing, but across the board, it consistently beats the 3060 while costing considerably less. Now, I wouldn't recommend it for every build in 2025, but if you're looking for raw rasterized performance at 1080p, the 5700 XT is quite possibly the smartest pickup you can make. Even compared to the $150 1080 Ti, which I absolutely love, it still holds its ground. I'll have to do a full comparison video before I can say for sure which one deserves the title of greatest GPU of all time. But if you want to see how a $500 GPU beats the RTX 3090, watch this video next.